They went behind my back to derail my career, never realizing that I was the one quietly approving their bonuses and performance reviews. What they thought was a petty family power play became unknowingly a front row seat to their own unraveling. If you're into stories where the underestimated one turns out to be running the show, don't go anywhere. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how this ends. Let me tell you something, peace doesn't always come from success or money. Sometimes it comes from sitting still while your enemies talk themselves into a trap of their own making. That's a lesson I learned just a few weeks ago when my own family attempted to freeze me out of a promotion, completely unaware that I had the final say over every executive decision at the firm they worked for. I'm Samantha Carter. Some people in fintech call me Sam or recognize me by my handle Grounded Eve. On paper, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Westbridge Capital, a private wealth firm headquartered in San Diego. What no one, especially not my family, knew was that 6 months ago, I became the majority stakeholder in Westbridge. I pulled it off through a quiet acquisition funded by a shell firm I'd founded back when I was 22. The seed money that came from the crypto trading bot. I coded myself while sleeping on an old futon in a friend's apartment in Sacramento, juggling a diner shift and a temp job at a call center during the day and teaching myself blockchain technology at night. Meanwhile, my brother Brandon Carter was doing what he always did, reinventing himself with whatever was trending. He dropped out of community college, branded himself a visionary serial entrepreneur, and started a half-dozen businesses that all folded before tax season. Our dad used to joke Sam's the responsible one, but responsibility didn't translate into support. I built 3 fintech platforms from scratch, sold them under pseudonyms, and poured the earnings into blind trusts and stealth equity vehicles. Brandon. He landed a job as a junior advisor at Westbridge Capital, thanks to some favors pulled by extended family. He even gave a TED-style talk called Leading with Vision, despite having never led anything but a startup that sold protein coffee and went bankrupt within a year. They all thought I was struggling unemployed, maybe freelancing. I let them believe it. Meanwhile, I orchestrated a silent takeover, acquiring the company's voting shares in a calculated strategy that took nearly a year to complete. I waited until the day they tried to vote against my promotion. That same day, I approved it myself. Then I terminated the person leading the sabotage. Spoiler alert, it was Brandon. When the board promoted me to Chief Strategy Officer, they believed they were rewarding a quiet, competent strategist. What they didn't know was that they had just handed the title to their new boss. Brandon's reaction during Sunday brunch was priceless. "Wow, moving up in the world, huh?" he said, tearing into a ribeye sarcasm thick in his voice. He leaned back with that trademark smugness. "Don't get too cozy in that seat. Strategy's a different beast when you're dealing with real money." Dad just offered a grunt of acknowledgement while focusing on his whiskey. Mom offered a hopeful smile. "Maybe Brandon can coach you a little. He's managed 7-figure portfolios since his 20s, you know." I just smiled, nodding slightly, and bit into my grilled asparagus. "I'll definitely keep that in mind," I said lightly. What they didn't realize. The final acquisition documents signed, notarized, and stored in my home safe had already made me the company's principal owner. But Brandon couldn't handle it. He had spent years being the family's prodigal son, the one with slick pitches and flashier titles, the poster boy of charisma. And me, I was the nerd, the overqualified girl who didn't have presence. At first, he played the role of the concerned sibling, dropping by Westbridge's offices to check in. I watched him through the glass panels of the executive floor as he chatted with department heads and joked with the COO. He subtly hinted that I was burned out, that I was still adjusting, planting seeds of doubt. Next came the internal murmurs. HR received anonymous complaints alleging misrepresented qualifications, false awards, and even academic fraud. It was all fake, but disturbingly methodical. When I finally asked him about it, he didn't flinch. "I'm just trying to protect you," Brandon said smoothly. "You know how firms are these days. Everyone's checking boxes, chasing diversity metrics. You got caught in the wave." He smirked, lowering his voice. "Just don't crash too hard." I let him talk. But the day after, I received a package, a matte black folder delivered straight to the boardroom. Inside were forged financials, fake wire transfers, and accusations of fraud. The board called for an emergency meeting that Monday. And I'd be there waiting with not just the truth but full control. Brandon must have caught a whiff of something through the office rumor mill because at dinner, the night before, he couldn't stop grinning. The board asked me to sit in on a meeting tomorrow. Big stuff shifts at the top, he said, tapping his fork on his wine glass. Mom lit up. Finally, they're recognizing your talent. Dad raised his scotch. About time. No one even asked why I hadn't been invited to this supposed realignment meeting, despite it being about my own division. But they didn't know I had spent the night assembling a comprehensive dossier, emails, audio logs, whistleblower records, timestamps, every shred of evidence tracking Brandon's months-long sabotage. And I had one final piece of paper that would knock the breath out of every smug face in that room. The updated ownership ledger of Westbridge Capital. If you think Brandon was going to strut out of that meeting untouched, you haven't been paying attention. Hit that subscribe button because the next chapter changes everything. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was resolved. Sitting in my office with a thick folder color-coded by incident type with timestamps down to the font size on forged PDFs, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't Brandon's takedown attempt. It was his reckoning. The board thought they were about to put me under review. They forgot who signs their checks. I arrived at Westbridge at 7:15 a.m., sharp coffee in hand, heels clicking across marble floors. Calm, focused, ready. At 8:45, Brandon arrived in a cobalt blazer that screamed bravado, our parents in tow, grinning like they were attending a graduation ceremony. "Is the board ready for us?" he asked the receptionist, smooth as butter. From my office window, I watched them disappear into the conference wing. And I smiled. Every director at Westbridge Capital had received my midnight dossier, a meticulous compilation of every lie, every whisper, and every forged document Brandon had seeded into the corporate ether, like poison dropped into a still lake. The silence of the boardroom just beyond the frosted glass doors of the executive suite hummed with anticipation. If you've ever waited for the truth to shatter illusion, if you've ever held your breath, as masks slipped and the performance ended like this video, and hit that subscribe button because what happens next is the moment I stopped waiting. At precisely 9:00 a.m., I rose from my chair with the slow, deliberate grace of someone who knew the weight of her own authority. I adjusted my blazer midnight navy tailored to precision and stepped into the hallway, my heels echoing against polished oak in rhythm with my steady pulse. This was no longer about a title or a seat at the table. This was the moment I stepped out of the shadows they cast around me. Inside the boardroom, Thomas Green, the firm's stately board chair, was mid-sentence, his voice carrying the formal cadence of someone accustomed to delicate power plays. "The allegations against Ms. Carter are not trivial." He began, his fingers steepled before him. "Apologies for the delay," I said evenly, gliding past the threshold and taking the head seat with a calmness that startled even me. Not a flicker of doubt crossed my face. Brandon's reaction was almost theatrical in its unraveling. His brows snapped together, his lips parting in a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Sam, this is a closed session," he snapped, voice tight with panic masquerading as authority. "You weren't invited." I folded my hands on the table, slowly, deliberately. Correction, I was never uninvited. And I believe it's rather difficult to conduct a board meeting without the company's principal owner. Wouldn't you agree? Silence fell like a guillotine. Brandon's complexion drained to a chalky gray, his swagger vaporized in the dry air. Across the polished table, my mother blinked, her hand frozen around her pearl necklace, as if it might anchor her to reality. My father's mouth twitched with the instinct to object, but never quite found the shape of a word. "What are you even saying?" Brandon scoffed, though the rasp in his voice betrayed the crack in his armor. "Westbridge is publicly traded." It was I interjected, nodding to Claire Jennings, my assistant, who stepped forward with quiet elegance. From the black folio she carried, she began to distribute the acquisition documentation, neatly tabbed, highlighted, initialed. "Until 4 months ago," I continued, "when it was privately acquired in full by Silverwood Holdings." The shuffle of chairs, the sudden rustle of paper, the sharp intake of breath around the room, it was all symphonic, and I conducted it with the composure of someone who had rehearsed every note. "Care to guess who owns Silverwood?" I added with a soft smile. Brandon sputtered. This is insane. You're just..." I raised an eyebrow. "Careful. You're speaking to the majority shareholder." And just like that, the narrative he had built over years of manipulation collapsed around him like a sandcastle before a rising tide. The board no longer saw a meek strategist. They saw the architect of their future. I've heard it all before, I said, voice as smooth as the marble underfoot. Just a data nerd. Just the boring one. I looked at Claire. Would you? She nodded and tapped the small remote in her hand. The boardroom speakers crackled before Brandon's voice, unmistakable and slick, filled the space. She's book smart, sure, he had said in one recording, laughter lacing the venom, but she doesn't have the spine for leadership. In another, honestly, she's a diversity checkbox. They had to pick someone. Each clip was more damning than the last, mocking, diminishing, undermining. Tension built in the room, thickening like storm clouds. Directors shifted uncomfortably. Brandon, once the golden boy, sat stone still as his own voice unraveled him. Each whispered seed of sabotage became confession, each clever barb now evidence. And then there's this, I said, placing a manila folder before them. I opened it slowly, deliberately. Inside the same folder, he had sent the board stuffed with doctored spreadsheets, counterfeit wire transfers, and fabrications meant to soil my name. These were sent anonymously to the board. I explained, my tone professional, but laced with quiet disdain. They allege fraud, incompetence, misconduct. They were lies, sloppy, desperate lies. Did you really believe no one would verify them? I was protecting Westbridge, Brandon stammered, the tremor in his voice undeniable. You're not fit to lead, he blurted suddenly, anger breaking through the panic. You've always been the invisible one, the afterthought. You don't belong at the top. No, Brandon, I said, voice like glass. I'm the one who built the path to the top. And now I'm the one holding you accountable for every lie, every whisper, and every risk you forced this company to bear. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely audible. Samantha, surely you're not going to ruin your brother's life over this. As if he didn't try to ruin mine, I replied, locking eyes with her. As if you didn't walk into this room today expecting to watch me fall. My father raised a hand, slightly hesitant. We were only here to support Brandon. No, I said, staring straight through him. You came to watch me fail again, just like always. You bet on the wrong child. I turned to the board, rising slowly, shoulders square. Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the tone of this meeting, but I believe it's necessary for every one of you to understand what's at stake. Mr. Brandon Carter, I said clearly, has knowingly breached ethical and legal boundaries in an orchestrated effort to undermine executive leadership at Westbridge Capital. A hush blanketed the room. This wasn't merely an attack on me, I continued. It was an attack on the company's credibility, on its leadership integrity, and on its future. Thomas Green cleared his throat. Ms. Carter, what actions are you recommending? I met his gaze. First, I request that all allegations against me be formally dismissed, supported by the enclosed documentation and recordings. Second, I request immediate disciplinary action against Mr. Carter for corporate misconduct. I paused for breath. Then I also request that a formal report be filed with his licensing board and financial affiliations. His actions must carry professional consequences. You can't, Brandon whispered, his voice cracked and raw. You'll destroy everything I've worked for. Like you tried to destroy mine, I replied, my voice unflinching. The difference, I brought proof. You brought fiction. And finally, I said I ask that Brandon Carter and our parents be permanently barred from all Westbridge Capital properties. Any attempt to contact employees or interfere with company operations should result in immediate legal action. Samantha, please. My mother's voice cracked through the tension, choked with tears that streaked rivulets down the carefully applied foundation of her face, as if grief itself was trying to break through the pretense. We're still family. I exhaled softly, almost like a sigh carried on wind, long overdue. A bitter laugh curled at the edge of my lips, quiet but sharp, forged from the weight of betrayal. Family, I said, letting the words settle like ash. Family lifts you when you're low. Family celebrates your triumphs without envy. Family doesn't try to burn down what you've built out of jealousy and fear. With deliberate precision, I reached into my leather case and withdrew one final folder. Its cover, gold embossed and elegant, caught the overhead light like a mirror to their illusions. I slid it across the polished mahogany toward them. This, I said with cold clarity, is the acquisition agreement from my first company. I sold it for $50 million when I was 27. Their silence was deafening. The second I continued, pausing only long enough to meet my father's eyes, a blockchain security platform went for 180. 2 years later. He flinched ever so slightly. I could have bought you that oceanfront golf club membership you used to brag about. Could have bailed Brandon out of every fantasy venture he launched with empty confidence. But I didn't. The silence grew deeper, thicker like velvet soaked in rain. Their gazes, once dismissive, now hovered over those documents, as if trying to decode a language they never bothered to learn. I stayed quiet, I said, voice steady, because I needed to know who stood beside me when you believed I had nothing. I turned to Brandon. His face was pale, jaw slack. You all failed that test. His lips moved barely a whisper. You're destroying my career. I shook my head slowly, sadness folding into resolve. No, you destroyed it the day you tried to sabotage mine. The only difference is I have the evidence. You have the shame. I stood gathering my folders with clinical calm. This meeting is adjourned, I said to Thomas, whose nod was a quiet endorsement of closure. Ensure the minutes are archived in full. Then I turned to them, Brandon, my parents. Security will escort you out. Wait, Brandon called after me, voice frayed. Please, I was jealous. I couldn't take it. Watching you win. I paused at the door hand resting on the cool metal handle. Slowly I turned, meeting the eyes of a man who used to be my brother. You want to know the real difference between us? I asked. He looked up broken. What? When I was struggling, you kicked me lower. When I finally rose, I said nothing, just so you wouldn't feel small. My words were quiet, but they rang with the weight of years. That's the difference between building something real and living inside a fantasy of borrowed glory. The weeks that followed unspooled like an epilogue scripted by justice. Brandon was dismissed, no public scandal, just a swift, silent termination once the evidence was reviewed. The networks that once lionized him began whispering my name instead. My parents left voicemails brittle with apology and hesitation. Brandon sent an email. His lawyer followed with a soft corporate speak-laced statement about reflection and growth. I archived them all unopened. 3 months passed. One night, buried in a portfolio review, Claire buzzed my intercom. Someone's here. Says it's personal. It was Brandon. But not the Brandon of manicured suits and curated confidence. This one wore fatigue like a second skin. His hoodie hung limp over slouched shoulders. Sneakers untied. Eyes sunken yet raw with something close to honesty. I'm not here to argue, he murmured, lifting a manila folder like a white flag. Just wanted you to have this. He placed it gently on my desk. Everything I used, emails, fake logs, accounts. I'm forwarding it to the board too. No PR spin, no excuse. I looked at him waiting. Why now? He exhaled, eyes down. Because you were right. You were building something real. I was copying it, resenting it. And when it worked for you, I couldn't accept it. He turned to go, pausing only to glance back. I'm starting over. Interning at a fintech incubator. Real work. No titles. No shortcuts. I don't expect you to forgive me, Sam, but you letting me fail? That taught me more than anyone else ever did. He reached for the door. Brandon, I said softly. He froze, half-turned. Send me your resume in a year. His eyes flickered. Not for a leadership role, I added. But if you're serious about starting over, there's always room here for someone who's ready to earn it. From the bottom up. A single tear welled in his eye. No grand exit, no clever retort. Just a quiet nod. And then he left. 6 months later, Westbridge had not only recovered, it had soared. We'd expanded into 3 new investment sectors, launched a mentorship initiative for underrepresented tech founders, and doubled down on ESG-backed portfolios. The company was no longer just a success story. It was a platform for others like me who were once dismissed for being too quiet, too odd, too female. My parents still message sometimes, when they need something, when they want to name-drop the daughter they once ignored. I'm cordial, polite, distant. The approval I used to crave, I no longer need it. The corner office, the one they said I'd never earn, overlooks the San Diego harbor where sunsets spill gold into the Pacific, and every evening feels like closure. Just last week I received a holiday card, handwritten, from Brandon. No apologies, no pleas, just one line. You didn't succeed because of us? You succeeded in spite of us? I'm finally learning how to build for real. And maybe in the end, that's what real power looks like. Not thunderous, not vengeful, but earned, silently and with certainty. And if you've made it this far, if this story has stirred something quiet and persistent in you, consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Not just to follow what comes next, but to remind yourself that even silent strength can move mountains.